My name is Nicholas Green. I'm 67 years old, and I thought I'd seen every storm life could throw at me, but nothing prepared me for the night my own daughter looked me in the eye and said, "Serve my husband or leave." I wasn't born into an easy life. My hands have been calloused for as long as I can remember. I worked 40 years as a construction foreman in Cincinnati, building bridges, homes, and offices out of dust and steel. When my wife, Margaret, passed away after a long battle with cancer, I thought the hardest part of my life was behind me. I tried to build peace from the pieces she left me. Coffee at the corner diner each morning, Sunday services at St. Paul's, and long walks by the Ohio River where I could hear my thoughts. But peace doesn't last long when family is involved. My daughter, Amanda, was my entire world. She was born late in my life, my only child, when I was already 40. I raised her with grit and stubborn love after her mother's passing. Every scraped knee, every heartbreak, she always ran to me first. For years, we were inseparable. That started to change the day she met Richard Collins. Richard was a salesman out of Louisville. He had the kind of smile that showed too many teeth and a handshake that squeezed too tight, like he was trying to prove something. I never trusted him, not for a second. But Amanda, she fell head over heels. And like most fathers, I swallowed my doubts and gave her away at the wedding. That was 10 years ago. In the years since, my visits to their home in Blue Ash grew strained. Richard made it clear I wasn't welcome. Amanda grew colder, more distant. She wasn't the same girl who used to beg me for ice cream after school. I told myself it was just life, that children grow up, that families change. But deep down, I knew Richard was pulling her strings. This past Thanksgiving proved me right. The Collins house looked perfect from the outside. White shutters, trimmed hedges, the American flag hung just right. Inside, the smell of turkey and pie filled the air, but the silence pressed heavier than the food. I sat at their polished oak dining table, trying to make small talk. My grandchildren, Ethan and Lily, barely looked up from their iPads. Amanda forced smiles, and Richard carved the turkey like he was performing surgery. I tried. I asked Ethan about his soccer games, Lily about school. Their replies were short, coached glances flicking toward Richard as if waiting for approval before speaking. Richard smirked at me across the table, eyes saying without words, "You don't belong here." Dessert came and went. The air grew colder, though the fireplace still burned. Then Amanda cleared her throat. "Dad," she began, her voice clipped, "Richard and I talked about this. We need to set some boundaries." I raised my eyes, steady. "Boundaries?" She wouldn't meet my gaze. "You're welcome here, of course, but if you're going to stay, you need to be more helpful. Richard works hard. He shouldn't have to lift a finger when he's home. You should be serving him when you visit, helping around the house, running errands, things like that." I set my fork down, slowly. Serving him. Richard leaned back in his chair, smug as ever. "It's about respect, Nicholas. A man runs his household. Guests need to understand that, especially family." Amanda's words fell sharper than any hammer I'd held in my life. Serve my husband or leave. The clock in the hallway ticked. Ethan and Lily froze. The room was suffocating with silence. I looked at Amanda, my Amanda, the girl who once clutched my hand crossing busy streets, who cried in my arms the night her first love broke her heart. And now here she was, siding with this man, demanding I bow to him like some servant. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam my fist. Richard wanted me to explode so he could twist the story against me.
Amanda braced herself for the storm, but instead I smiled. Not a wide smile, a knowing one. The kind a man wears when he's already made up his mind.
I folded my napkin neatly, placed it on the table, and pushed back my chair. "You want me gone?" I said softly. "So be it." Amanda's eyes widened. "Dad, that's not—" I lifted a hand. "No, you've spoken your mind. I hear you loud and clear." I stood, adjusted my jacket, and looked around the room one last time. At the expensive furniture, at the polished family portraits, Richard's smug face in every one, at Amanda, her expression torn between guilt and defiance. Then I said the words that made Richard's smirk falter. "I'll pack my things tonight, but remember this, Amanda, every choice has consequences, and I don't leave without leaving something behind." Her face drained of color. She tried to speak, but her throat caught. I walked to the door. Behind me, Richard muttered, "Good riddance." Amanda whispered, "Dad, please." But it was too late. I stepped into the November night, the cold air burning my lungs. Their house glowed warm behind me, but it no longer felt like home. I smiled once more, not for them, just for me, because they had no idea what was coming. If you were in my shoes, would you have swallowed your pride or walked away? Comment below. I'd love to hear from you. I drove home that Thanksgiving night with the weight of Amanda's words pressing on my chest. "Serve my husband or leave." They echoed louder than the tires on the blacktop, louder than the wind against the windshield. When I pulled into my driveway, the house looked emptier than it had in years. It wasn't Margaret's death that made it feel so hollow now. It was Amanda's betrayal. The woman I raised, the child I sacrificed everything for, had chosen Richard over me. I sat in the driver's seat for a long while, staring at the porch light I'd left on. For years, that light had been my way of saying, "You're welcome here, always." But after tonight, I wasn't sure who I was leaving the light on for anymore. Inside, I sat at the kitchen table, poured myself a cup of black coffee, and let the past creep in. The house smelled faintly of sawdust and old books. The photographs on the walls seemed to watch me. Amanda as a baby in Margaret's arms, Amanda at her high school graduation, Amanda in her white wedding dress, tears of joy in her eyes. After Margaret's funeral, Amanda was only 13. I remember her standing in the doorway, clutching my hand and asking, "Dad, who's going to tuck me in now?" I promised her then I'd never leave her side. I worked overtime jobs to keep her in private school. I packed her lunches every morning, even when my body ached from 12-hour shifts. I taught her to drive in the empty lot behind the old grocery store. She used to laugh when I pressed the imaginary brake on the passenger side, swearing she'd give me a heart attack. She was my whole reason for waking up each day. And now she was telling me that if I wanted to stay in her life, I had to serve Richard.
Part of me wanted to forgive her instantly. Blood runs deep, and I knew Richard's tongue was sharp enough to twist even the purest heart. But the other part of me burned. How many years had I carried her through life's storms, only to be tossed aside like an old shoe? I poured another cup of coffee, trying to drown the rage. But forgiveness doesn't come easy when respect has been broken. My mind ran through what she'd said, word for word. Not a plea, not a request, an ultimatum. That's when I realized this wasn't just Amanda speaking. Those were Richard's words coming out of her mouth. I began to see the pattern more clearly. The way Amanda no longer called me Dad as warmly as she used to. The way my phone calls went unanswered or returned days later with short, distracted replies. The way my grandchildren, once eager to climb into my lap, now treated me like a stranger. Richard was cutting me out of their lives thread by thread. He didn't want a father-in-law with wisdom, with experience, with backbone. He wanted control, and I was in his way. The memories I had brushed off now sharpened like knives. The look in Richard's eyes when Amanda asked my advice about their mortgage. The quick subject changes whenever I spoke of family traditions. The constant silent message, "You don't belong here, Nicholas." A week after Thanksgiving, I checked my mailbox. Nestled between bills and grocery flyers was a small envelope. The handwriting wasn't Amanda's. It was stiff, deliberate. Inside was a holiday card. On the front, a snowy village. Inside, just 6 words written in black ink. "Merry Christmas. We'll be busy this year."
No names, no love, no invitation, just a polite dismissal disguised as holiday cheer. I sat on my porch, card in hand, and something inside me snapped. This wasn't just neglect, it was intentional. Richard was erasing me from their lives, one step at a time. I noticed other things, too. Amanda closed her social media to me, something she'd never done before. Ethan's birthday passed with no invitation to the party. When I drove by their street out of habit, I saw Richard in the driveway, arm around Amanda, smiling smugly as if he knew I was watching. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Richard didn't just want me out of their home, he wanted me out of their lives. Permanently. That night, I sat in my recliner, the TV buzzing quietly untouched. My eyes wandered to Margaret's old Bible on the shelf. I pulled it down, and tucked inside, between the pages of Psalms, was a photo of Amanda at 5 years old, holding a paper crown she'd made for me on Father's Day. On the back, in her childish handwriting, she had scrawled, "For Daddy, King of the World." I clenched the photo in my hand. My daughter had once seen me as her king. Now Richard wanted me to kneel as his servant. And in that moment, I understood something with icy clarity. Richard wasn't going to stop. Unless I acted, he would erase me completely. Would you give your daughter another chance or cut ties completely? Let me know below, and don't forget to hit like if you're still with me.
The first snow of December fell heavy on my street that morning. I'd just finished shoveling the walkway when I noticed a plain brown envelope wedged into my mailbox. No return address, no stamp, just my name, Nicholas Green, scrawled across the front in blocky handwriting. I turned it over in my hands. It wasn't from Amanda. Her handwriting had always been soft and rounded, even when she was a teenager. This was rough, deliberate. Someone had put effort into staying anonymous. Inside the house, I set the envelope on the table and stared at it over a steaming cup of coffee. For 10 minutes, I debated whether to open it. My gut told me it was trouble. But after Amanda's ultimatum and Richard's smirk burned into my memory, I wasn't in the mood to run from trouble. I tore it open. Inside were photocopies of financial documents, loan agreements, deeds, and what looked like corporate filings. My eyes aren't what they used to be, but I could still make out the names printed clearly across the dotted lines. Amanda Collins, Richard Collins, side by side. Amanda's signature, my little girl's handwriting, was scrawled on more than one page. My chest tightened. She hadn't just married Richard, she was bound to him financially, tied up in whatever schemes he was cooking. The numbers didn't add up either. A second mortgage on their house, credit lines opened under joint ownership, a shell company registered to a P.O. box in Louisville. This wasn't just household finances. This was manipulation, fraud, maybe worse. I sat back, documents spread across the table, my heart pounding. For years, I had chalked Amanda's coldness up to Richard's influence. But here it was, in black and white. She wasn't just under his thumb. She was in the game with him. I wanted to deny it, to tell myself Amanda had been tricked, maybe forced. But her signature wasn't forged. I'd watched her sign her homework, her first driver's license application, even her marriage certificate. I knew her hand. Every pen stroke here was hers. I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white. Memories of Amanda as a child clashed with this damning evidence. The little girl who once built forts out of blankets and begged me for bedtime stories had grown into a woman who chose Richard's world over mine, and now she was helping him build it. The betrayal was heavier than the snow piling up outside. Still, as much as it stung, the discovery lit a spark inside me. For the first time since that Thanksgiving dinner, I felt something other than grief or anger. I felt power. These papers weren't just numbers and names. They were leverage. Proof that Amanda and Richard weren't the golden couple they pretended to be. Proof that Richard's empire was built on cracks. I gathered the documents into a neat stack, slid them into a folder, and locked them away in the old metal filing cabinet in my study, the same one I used to keep pay stubs, insurance papers, and Margaret's medical records. Not confronting them immediately was the hardest choice I'd made. My first instinct was to drive straight to Amanda's house, slap the papers down on the table, and demand answers. But revenge, real revenge, doesn't come from shouting matches. It comes from patience, from letting the guilty write their own downfall, word by word, until the evidence speaks louder than you ever could. So, I waited. I went about my days as if nothing had changed. Morning coffee at the diner, Sunday service at St. Paul's, small talk with neighbors about the weather, but inside I carried the secret weight of those papers.
Every time the phone rang, I wondered if it would be Amanda, calling with some half-hearted apology. It never was. Every time I saw Richard's name pop up in local business news, I thought of the documents in my filing cabinet. I even drove past their house again, the same glowing fortress it had been on Thanksgiving. This time, though, I didn't just see Richard's smug face in the window. I saw Amanda's, Kale, and I wondered how deep she was in, how far she'd fallen from the little girl who once made me Father's Day crowns out of construction paper. The waiting ate at me, but it also sharpened me. For the first time in years, I felt like the foreman I used to be on construction sites, steady, calculating, patient enough to see the whole blueprint before lifting a hammer. One night, I sat in my study with Margaret's Bible on the desk beside me, the folder of documents tucked away nearby. The house was quiet. The only sound was the tick of the clock on the wall. I thought of Amanda again. Her smile at 16, her tears at 23 when she said, "I do." Her voice just weeks ago telling me to serve my husband or leave. I whispered into the silence. Every choice has consequences. And now, Amanda, so will yours. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't even a heartbreak. It was resolve. Cold, quiet, steady resolve. They had written their story with lies and signatures. Now I would hold the pen that finished it. As I turned off the light and closed the study door, I made a silent vow. I wouldn't need to lift a finger to destroy them. Their own choices would be their undoing. If your own child signed away your legacy, could you forgive them
or would you seek revenge? Subscribe and share your thoughts.
Christmas morning came colder than I could remember. Snow blanketed the streets of blue ash, muffling everything in a false sense of peace. My phone buzzed just after sunrise. The caller ID flashed Amanda. I hesitated before answering. It had been weeks since the Thanksgiving ultimatum, and the silence between us had grown heavier by the day. Finally, I picked up. "Dad?" Amanda's voice was careful, rehearsed almost. "We'd like you to join us for Christmas dinner. The kids would love to see you." I let the silence hang before answering. "Christmas, huh?" "Yes," she pressed. "Richard thought it might be good to start fresh." I nearly laughed. Richard didn't want a fresh start. He wanted control. But I agreed anyway. "I'll be there," I said, my tone flat. If they wanted theater, I'd give them a performance. Their house glowed with Christmas lights, every bulb in perfect order, like Richard had measured the distance with a ruler. Inside, a 12-foot tree stood in the living room, decked with ornaments that looked like they'd come straight from a department store window. Amanda greeted me at the door with a stiff hug, her perfume strong enough to cover nerves. Richard appeared next, his arm draped around her like a claim. "Nicholas," he said warmly, though his eyes stayed cold. "Glad you could make it." I handed Amanda a box of chocolates for the kids. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Dinner smelled wonderful. Honey ham, roasted potatoes, all the trimmings. But the tension around the table was thicker than the gravy. Ethan and Lily peeked at me between bites, uncertain whether to smile or keep quiet. Richard carved the ham with his usual smug precision, then leaned back in his chair. "Nicholas, we've been thinking. You live alone in that old house. Must get lonely." I kept my face unreadable. "Sometimes." Richard's smile widened. "Amanda and I agree it would be better if you sold the place. Move in with us. Plenty of room here." Amanda nodded quickly, avoiding my eyes. "Yes, Dad, it just makes sense. Families should be together." My blood boiled, but I forced to cuckle. "That's generous of you. I'll think about it." They believed they were pushing me into a corner. What they didn't know was that I had already drawn the blueprint for their downfall.
2 days before Christmas, I'd driven downtown to meet an old friend, Ben Price. He'd been my attorney back when I bought my first home, a sharp man with graying hair and a mind like a steel trap. Ben listened as I laid out the story. Amanda's ultimatum, the envelope of financial documents, Richard's pressure. He tapped his pen against his legal pad, frowning. "They're tying everything together under Richard's control," Ben said. "If you cave, Nicholas, you'll lose everything." "I don't plan to cave," I replied, "but I need them to think I might." Ben leaned back in his chair. "So you want a trap? Something legal, airtight?" "Exactly. I want them to sign their own noose." Ben drafted paperwork, harmless on the surface, but with disclosures tucked deep inside. Agreements that acknowledged debts, joint liabilities, and shady transfers. All I needed was Richard's arrogance and Amanda's blind loyalty to carry the pen across the page. Back at the Collins dining table, I kept my voice smooth. "Richard, Amanda, I've been thinking about what you said, about selling the house. Maybe you're right. I'm not getting any younger." Amanda's face lit up. Richard's smirk deepened. "That's the spirit. Why don't we put it in writing, just to be clear about arrangements?" I pulled a small folder from my coat pocket, sliding it onto the table. Already thought of that. A simple agreement Ben Price helped me draft. Just formalities. Richard didn't hesitate. He skimmed the pages quickly, too confident to look closely. Amanda glanced nervously, but when Richard handed her the pen, she signed without protest.
The kids watched wide-eyed as their parents scribbled away, oblivious to the traps snapping shut around them. I took the signed papers back with a steady hand, slipping them into the folder. My heart was pounding, but my face stayed calm.
The rest of dinner passed in strained small talk. Richard boasted about a new client in Louisville. Amanda talked about the kids' school programs. I nodded politely, every word rolling off me like water. When dessert came, a perfect pecan pie, I even forced a laugh at one of Richard's jokes. The performance had to hold until I walked out their door. At one point, Amanda reached for my hand across the table. "Dad, I'm glad you came." Her touch felt foreign now, as if the daughter I raised was buried under layers of Richard's control. I squeezed her hand gently, but said nothing, because the truth was already written, in ink, in their own handwriting, on documents they hadn't bothered to read. As I stood in the foyer pulling on my coat, Richard clapped me on the back. "Good man, Nicholas. You'll see, this arrangement will be better for everyone." I looked him in the eye and smiled, but it wasn't the smile of surrender. It was the smile of a man holding the key to his enemy's undoing. They thought Christmas dinner was their performance, but the real act had been mine. When I stepped out into the cold night air, folder tucked under my arm, I whispered to myself, "You've signed your own fate, and you don't even know it." Would you have exposed them right there at the table, or kept the plan quiet? Comment below, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what happens next.
The escalation came in a white envelope left on my porch. No return address, just a single sheet inside. "Sell the house, or you'll regret it." Those words sat on the kitchen table under the lamp, the ink staring up like an accusation. For years, I had faced dangers on construction sites, the creak of a beam, the wrong knot in a rope, but this felt different. It was personal. It was meant to make me small. I could have burned the note, let the flame eat the threat. Instead, I slid it into the folder with the financial documents. If they wanted to play rough, I intended to meet them on their own terms. That night, Amanda called. Her voice trembled and then steadied, like a hand that shakes while learning to hide it. "Dad, please, you don't have to make this harder. Just sell the house. For us, for the kids," she said. There was pleading beneath her words, but also a coldness I didn't recognize. "Who's making you say that, Amanda? Is Richard threatening you?" I asked. A pause. "It's complicated. You don't understand how things work. Richard, he provides for us. We have bills, responsibilities. We need stability." Her tone tried to be reasonable. It sounded rehearsed. "I tell him I won't be bullied. Tell Richard I won't sell because some piece of paper says so." "I'm begging you, Dad, for the kids." The line clicked sooner than I could answer. I drove to Ben Price's office that night. The city lights blurred against the windshield. Ben is straight-talking, sharp as a tack. He read the anonymous note and arranged his face into that lawyer look, calm, calculating. "This is intimidation," he said. "We can file a report, but they're counting on fear to make you move." "Then we'll make fear work for us," I said. "We'll force them into mistakes. We'll make a paper trail that leads straight to them."
Ben nodded. We worked until the streetlights flickered off, drafting and tightening language. We added disclosure clauses that would trigger bank reviews, inserted lines that linked specific transfers to shell accounts, and set up alerts on trust accounts that would flag anything odd. Ben also prepared a chain of custody for every document, so nothing could be denied. "It's legal jujitsu," Ben mused. "Use their momentum against them." I left his office with a folder of revised documents and a plan. It felt cold and clinical. I thought of Margaret and how she used to say the law is like mortar. You need something steady between the stones or the whole thing crumbles. For the next week, I kept a quiet watch. I drove past their house more times than I cared to admit. I saw men pull up late at night, sometimes Richard slipping into a delivery truck for a brief minute, or a business card stuffed in an envelope and left at the door. Small things. But to someone who'd spent his life reading blueprints, small things are everything. Then one morning, Richard called, syrupy and smooth. "Nicholas, we need to finalize this. We've prepared trust documents. We just need your signature to make things official." He came by that afternoon, confident as ever, Amanda trailing behind. Richard laid the papers on my kitchen table, the kind of glossy forms designed to comfort the gullible. He assumed I'd bend. He assumed Amanda would back him. I pretended to be indecisive, played the weary old man who might finally cave. Richard saw the opening and handed Amanda the pen. She signed, her hand slightly shaking but obedient. Richard followed, sharp, quick. When they left, I watched the tail lights fade down the street, their shoulders high with triumph. They walked like men who'd just closed a deal. What they didn't know was Ben had already arranged a counterstrike. Hidden in the trust's boilerplate clauses were clauses that required full disclosure of recent transfers and an audit trigger. Ben had also pre-filed notices with the bank that would flag the signatures and any attempt to move assets. A few carefully chosen phrases would make a bank compliance officer look twice and then pull the thread. Within hours, the bank began its quiet work. Transfers mentioned in the paperwork were flagged for review. An auditor requested copies of supporting documents. Suddenly, the neat path Richard had planned started to look messy. Too many questions. Too many odd routes.
I held the anonymous threat letter again, tucking it beside the newly signed papers. The cold outside matched the chill in my hands, but a new feeling had settled in. Control. I'd watched the man who'd tried to erase me from his life sign the very papers that would expose him. Amanda called later that night. Her voice was smaller, frayed. "Dad, things are happening. They're asking questions. I don't know what to do." "You tell the truth," I said. "You tell them everything you know." She didn't answer. Later, a voicemail came, her voice broken, saying only, "I'm scared." Their threats had produced fear, but they had also revealed their own footprints. Greed makes people sloppy. Fear makes them quicker to cover tracks and quicker to make mistakes. I sat in my kitchen with the folder at my side, the threat note folded into it like a dark bookmark. Outside, the neighbors' lights blinked and cars passed. Inside, I felt the steady hum of plans taking shape. That night, I lay awake thinking about Margaret's steady hands and the sound of her telling me to be careful but not cowardly. Her voice steadied me. I knew this was no longer just about property. It was about truth and about teaching the next generation what integrity looked like. They thought they were crushing me. Instead, they'd provided the opening I needed. What would come next would either bury them or bury the only family I had left. What would you do after a threat like that? Give in or fight harder? Hit like if you'd fight back.
The first call came from Ben, crisp and direct. "They've taken the bait, Nicholas. The disclosures flagged the bank's compliance department. Subpoenas are on their way." I sat at my kitchen table, coffee cooling beside the folder that had become my arsenal. For weeks I had lived with silence, with threats, with whispered phone calls from Amanda begging me to bend. Now the silence was breaking. The law was moving. Within days, word trickled through Blue Ash like rainwater seeping into the cracks of pavement. People who once envied the Collins family's manicured lawns and shiny cars began whispering. The Collinses, it seemed, weren't as pristine as their white shutters and carefully ironed clothes suggested. At the diner where I took my morning coffee, two regulars leaned close at the counter. "Did you hear? Richard Collins, subpoenaed. Something with the bank," one said. "Never trusted that man," the other muttered. I stirred my coffee slowly, eyes on the steam. But inside, a grim satisfaction stirred. By the end of the week, Richard's smile had thinned. The grand gestures, the expensive dinners, the loud boasts, they all grew quieter. Amanda's eyes, though, told a different story. They weren't cold anymore. They were clouded. Guilt, fear, maybe both. She came to me late one evening, unannounced, her car parked crooked in my driveway. She stood in the doorway like a stranger. My daughter, but not the girl I had raised. Her hands trembled as she clasped them together. "Dad, I need to talk to you," she said. I let her in. She sat at the same table where Richard had once laid out his papers, where Margaret and I used to eat supper, where Amanda herself had once done her homework while I checked the math she never liked. Her words spilled out fast, fragile. "Richard manipulated me. He said if I didn't back him, if I didn't push you, he'd walk out. He told me you'd only hold us back. I thought I was protecting my kids, protecting my family." Her voice cracked. "But I see now it was a lie. He used me." I listened, my jaw set. "You signed those papers, Amanda. Your name is on them." Tears welled. "I know. I was blind. I wanted to believe him, wanted to believe our life was real. But Dad, he's angry now. He says you won't stop until you've destroyed us. He says if you don't back off, he'll make sure you regret it."
Her words cut deeper than the anonymous threat letter ever had. Not because they were Richard's threats, but because they came from Amanda's lips, carrying the weight of her fear. I reached across the table, my calloused hand covering hers. "Amanda, listen to me. You made mistakes. We all have. But it's Richard who built this mess, not you. He's going to answer for it. And I'll make sure you and the kids aren't dragged under with him." For the first time in years, she met my eyes, not as Richard's wife, not as someone ashamed, but as my daughter. She whispered, "He won't let you win." I didn't answer, because she was right about one thing. Richard wouldn't go quietly. That night, I drew the curtains and sat in my recliner, the house unusually still. It was nearly midnight when I noticed it, the low hum of an engine outside. I pushed the curtain aside just enough to see. Parked across the street, half in shadow, was a black SUV. Its windows were tinted, its lights off, but the shape of it was deliberate. Not a neighbor, not an accident, a warning. I stood there, pulse steady, watching the SUV idle. Minutes passed, long enough for me to understand the message. "We're watching. We can reach you." Then the engine revved, and the SUV pulled away, its taillights vanishing into the night. I stayed at the window long after it disappeared, not afraid, no. Richard had underestimated me too many times, but awake, more awake than I had been in years. The trap was sprung, the law was circling, but the game, I knew, wasn't over. Richard wasn't done, and neither was I. Would you sleep peacefully knowing justice is on your side, or stay awake fearing revenge? Subscribe now and tell me what you'd do.
The morning was gray when Ben Price called. His voice was steady, but I could hear the edge beneath it. "Nicholas," he said, "we've uncovered something else, and you're not going to like it." I gripped the receiver tighter. "What now?" "It's Amanda," he said. "She's listed on a series of offshore accounts. Jersey, Cayman Islands. Not just Richard's name, hers. Transfers, signatures. Your daughter wasn't just pressured into this. She was part of it." For a moment, silence filled my kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. A clock ticked on the wall. My pulse roared in my ears. "She signed off?" I asked, though I already knew. "Yes, multiple times," Ben said. "This wasn't coercion. She benefited. We can't argue otherwise." I lowered myself into the chair, the same one where Amanda had once confessed Richard's manipulation. My daughter, crying, shaking, saying she'd been blinded by him. But now the truth stood naked. She wasn't only his victim, she was his partner. I wanted to believe she'd been tricked. I wanted to hold on to the memory of the little girl who used to sit on my shoulders at the county fair. But evidence doesn't lie. This betrayal cut deeper than Richard's smirk, deeper than any threat or letter. Amanda had chosen greed, and she'd chosen it twice. The courtroom was packed weeks later when Richard Collins sat at the defense table, his once proud shoulders sagging. Federal prosecutors outlined a litany of charges: fraud, money laundering, tax evasion. Amanda sat across from him, summoned as a key witness. She testified against Richard, her voice hollow, her eyes red. She admitted she'd signed the documents, admitted she'd allowed herself to be swept into his schemes. She spoke of manipulation, of fear.
But the prosecutors didn't need to paint her as innocent. They painted her as complicit. Her name on those offshore accounts sealed her fate in the eyes of the community. Richard scowled through it all, his mask of charm long gone. Amanda avoided looking at me. The gavel struck hard at the end of it all. Richard indicted on multiple counts, his future sealed behind bars. Amanda spared prison through cooperation, but her reputation lay in ruins. Friends turned away. Neighbors whispered louder than before. Even her children looked at her differently, confusion written on their young faces. I walked out of that courthouse into the cool air, the weight of justice heavy but not lightening my heart. I had won the battle, but I had lost something far greater. A week later, I stood at Margaret's grave, the autumn leaves crunching beneath my boots. Her headstone was simple, just as she had wanted. I brushed away the leaves, placed a fresh flower, and sat on the bench beside her. "Margaret," I said softly, "I did what I thought was right. I held them accountable. Richard will never hurt us again. But Amanda, she wasn't only his pawn. She was his shadow, and I couldn't save her from herself." I told her everything. The Thanksgiving night, the threats, the trap, the courtroom. I told her about Amanda's tears, about the evidence, about how greed had twisted the daughter we raised. "I buried you once, and now I feel like I've buried Amanda too, though she still walks this earth." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the cold of November. I closed my eyes and remembered Margaret's laughter, her steady hand on my shoulder when life seemed too heavy. Family betrayal doesn't fade. It festers. It eats away at trust until nothing remains but scars. And sometimes revenge is the only way to cut it out before it spreads. I rose, straightened my coat, and looked at Margaret's grave one last time. "Rest easy," I said. "I'll carry what's left." Then I walked away, the path ahead alone, Nettie, but unburdened by illusion. If your own blood betrayed you twice,
Would you ever let them back into your life? Comment below, and don't forget to subscribe for more sweet and sour revenge.